Nature Boy Rogers, one of wrestling's biggest crowd pleasers. He's the special guest on Jim Barniak's Sports Scrapbook. Next.
Back in the early 60s, before the salary wars that nowadays have turned our athletes into instant millionaires, few of our sports heroes knew the meaning of the term megabucks. But aided by the phenomena of closed-circuit television, one, Floyd Patterson, earned nearly $1 million for his rubber match title defense against Ingemar Johansson. But such paydays were otherwise unheard of. The big-name stars of the day, Wilt Chamberlain, Jim Brown, Sandy Koufax, Johnny Unitas, they couldn't match Patterson, even if they combined for a joint account. But there was one guy who came pretty close.
There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy.
Not always so strange, not always so enchanting, but he was the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. During the golden era of professional wrestling, from 1950 to 1963, he was the golden boy, too, earning millions of dollars during that time in wrestling history. Not bad for an ex-cop from Camden, who combined muscles with good looks and a great suntan. At age 60, he still has it all. And on this edition of Sports Scrapbook, we're going to find out about some of his secrets. We're all babies in television when it comes to this man, Buddy Rogers. And I think without a doubt, I think you were a sports first television star. Is that true?
Well, I guess, I was in the infancy of TV, and I believe wrestling was the only sport on TV at that particular time.
We're going back to the 40s now.
Yes.
And why? What was there about wrestling that made it so compatible with television?
Well, I don't know. I believe they chose wrestling because it's a dynamite sport. It gives a lot of action, and there's a lot of thrills to it, and a lot of things that the public really likes to see.
Buddy Rogers was a cop in Camden who used to lift weights as sort of a pastime, and from there, the wrestling career.
Well, I wrestled at the Camden YMCA in my earlier years, and after that, I turned pro in 1940 at the old Garden Pier in Atlantic City, which, by the way, just burned down a month ago.
Tell us a little bit about what the sport is like, the climate of professional wrestling now in the 40s.
In the 40s, well, in the 40s, you had Jimmy Londas, who was world's champion, and Ed Strangler Lewis, who was a former world's champion, and fellows like Chief Sanuki and Chief Chewocki, and the Dusek brothers, Jim Browning, Nick Lutz, Paul Bosch. They were all great wrestlers, and there was a lot of wrestling them years. I mean, you didn't see much of poking in the eyes, constant hair pulling, constant kicking. There was a lot of wrestling, and the difference in my outlook of it today is that the wrestling part is a lost art today.
A lot of gimmickry today.
Yes, you know, I'm not here to knock wrestling. In fact, I'd walk off the show before I'd knock the sport. It was good to me. I was good to it. And I love wrestling and always will. It's always been my #1 thing in my life. But I don't like some of the things I see today. And, you know, I'm a walking advertisement for wrestling. And people come up and talk wrestling all the time. And what I'd like to come right down to is I'd like to see a lot of this stuff just thrown out of it, really.
Well, you wrestled in what's called the golden era of wrestling.
Yes.
But let's find out how you got to the status of world's champion and to the status of the game's biggest money winner. Now, you start wrestling in Camden here, and you start banging around in some of the small arenas, but something must have happened to quickly move you to the top of the heap.
Well, I believe that, you know, now again, you're asking me and I have to come right out with it the way I feel and the way it actually is. I've done perhaps more for wrestling than any wrestler. I'd say there's two of us, Lou Thez and myself. We were the two wrestlers that did, in the last 25, 30 years, did the most for wrestling. And a lot of things I see in wrestling today are a lot of things that I invented, and a lot of things I'd done. And I'm constantly being emulated from anything that I see today.
Well, what happened in your own career, though, that moved you forward so quickly? What did you have going for you?
Well, I had conditioning. I had that little four-letter word called guts. I had a lot of ability. And you just couldn't hold me down. I lived, ate, slept wrestling day in and day out. That was my whole life.
Can you go back to a time period or maybe a sequence of matches where things really turned around for you and you began to gather this popularity?
Yeah, around 1943, I was a policeman in Camden at the time. In that era is where I first started to really turn around and really catch on as far as the public was concerned. And then 1945, right after the war, I went down to Texas and won my first big title, the Texas state title. And that was the biggest thing happened to me at that period of time.
We have a picture we can see in just a few seconds of you wrestling in Chicago, Comiskey Park, with 41,000 people in attendance. And that would be unheard of today, I think.
Well, it's been unheard of as far as I know. I've never heard of another crowd in wrestling that large. But there was a tremendous interest in wrestling in them years, and people loved wrestling. And sure, you hear a lot of negatives on wrestling today, but it's just a case of mismatching or, you know, again, there's a lot of things that could be turned around to where they could draw 40,000 people again. And them years, we had people wrestling-minded, and they just loved wrestling. And that's why we drew like we did.
You had some flair, too, called Nature Boy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure did.
Where'd you pick up that tag?
First time I wrestled in the Hollywood Legion Stadium on the coast. I had a real heavy tan. I just come out of Galveston, Texas, and I wore a little white jacket then, and I opened up that jacket, and everybody started screaming, "Nature Boy." And my manager at the time said, "Man, I just tagged you with a hell of a name." And from that time, it stuck.
And then by, what, the late 50s, you were on top. You were the world's champ, and you were the biggest draw in the sport. And I guess, as we mentioned, maybe Floyd Patterson might have been making some more money than you, but next to him, there was nobody else near your bracket.
Oh, I guess God was with me, and I was very fortunate. I did draw a lot of money in the field. And, well...
How hard did you have to work at it? I mean, how often were you wrestling?
Oh, 3-4 times a week. I do that for, I guess, about 9 months out of the year. And then 3 months out of each year, I'd lay around the beach. I'm a sun bug.
But packing them in? Oh,
yes. There was, well, at the height of TV, I'd say all started really around 54, 53, 54. I wrestled all over this country, and any place that we went, I don't care, little towns like Beckley, West Virginia, we draw 15,000 people. Zanesville, Ohio, 10,000 people. Sometime it would nearly be as big as a town. They just came from all over. And we knew that TV was, you know, the thing that really did it. The exposure and the people seeing us. But again, you know, the individual had to have something unique in order to draw that kind of money and draw that type of people.
People think back to that era and the name Gorgeous George pops up, but he was kind of an exception, wasn't he, in terms of a guy who depended on...
George started in 1947, and in fact, there was a lot of promoters didn't want to handle Gorgeous George. They all thought it was a disgrace to wrestling for a guy to come in there with bleached hair and rolled up gold bobby pins and the flary robes he had. Well, even I was one that I thought it was a cardinal sin to see this guy walk in the ring, but let me tell you something. Gorgeous George drew more money in the 7-year period than even I did. He made $9 million in 7 years. So I have to say this, I don't care how you make it as long as you make it.
But he was an exception. Most of the guys in your era were more, you know, pure wrestlers.
Yes, true. But we all hated the fact that George was making a lot more money than we were. But let's face it, today you got a lot of guys that are emulating Gorgeous George, you know, in the different robes and everything that he done, but they aren't drawing his kind of money. He was one of his kind.
Yeah. What kind of life was it? Were you able to travel by plane, or was it a rough grind moving around?
Well, at the start, we started like anyone else. Down the bottom, drove cars and trains and buses. Later on, when there was big money, we lived first class. And I made 14 trips around the world, and I lived first class all the way. So the promoters paid for it. I made sure I got my share of it.
Well, I was going to ask you, when you get to the top in that business, then, are you pretty much your own guy, or do you have management telling you where to wrestle, where to go?
Some fellows have managers. I was fortunate enough to handle myself, and I would do business with the different booking agents throughout the country, and I know where I was going the next month. I'd always be a month or two in advance knowing where I was going.
And you were really enjoying it?
Oh, loved it.
And the career...
Wrestling was my whole life.
And the career spanned a little over 20 years.
It sure did.
And ended when?
63, May 29th.
How?
Well, I waited a long time to bring this up, but I'm going to let it out to the public. I never said this to anyone else. I must have had thousands of people say to me, buddy, how did Bruno Sammartino ever beat you? Well, I'm going to give it to him right now. 6 weeks before, I had already signed for the match at Madison Square Garden with Sammartino. 6 weeks before that, I went in Georgetown University Hospital with a heart attack. I was in that hospital up till 5 days before I wrestled Sammartino. Now, you know what kind of shape I was in, but I made sure that I kept my word. I went through with that match. Any 15-year-old kid could have beat me that night that I went in that ring. Believe me, I had pains in my chest walking to the ring, just the excitement. But it's over with now. But to all those that wondered how Bruno could ever beat me, that's what went wrong. And what was wrong, that he did beat me.
And after that, the doctors just told you to forget it?
After that, I told myself to forget it. Yeah, school was out, and I knew it was all done. I just knew I couldn't produce like I did. But I kept my word. I went in that ring.
So now...
Prior to that, in a period of 2 years, I defeated Sammartino 11 straight times. So, as far as I was concerned, Bruno never stood a chance with me. In my prime, before I got my heart attack, I guarantee you Bruno never stood a chance with me.
It had to be awfully, not only a concern now about your health, which will scare the daylights out of anybody, but all of a sudden now your glorious career goes from here to there. And
it's a transition. You can't explain it. All is what it is. It really takes you down. It's something that you spent your whole life in this particular field, and all of a sudden, in fact, it was my whole life, all of a sudden, it's no more. You don't get another penny out of that field. You don't have anything to do with that field. Imagine you doing something all them years and loving it, and all of a sudden, you never do it again.
Well, forgetting the economics even, how about the The roar of the crowd and the entertaining part.
Everything, as far as that business was concerned, it was the hardest thing in my life for me to go out of wrestling. I didn't get as great in wrestling as I did by not loving it. It was my whole life. I can't explain it.
Mm-hmm.
But you take it from me, it's the toughest. The two toughest jobs in my life was climbing in that ring with San Martino, coming out of intensive care, and knowing I could never wrestle again after that. Right. So they were my two toughest jobs.
Well, going back to the happier times during your career, certain things must stand out, and one of them has to be the match in Chicago where you got 41,000 people in it.
Oh yeah, well, that was the greatest moment of my life in wrestling, knowing that I drew the largest crowd in the history of wrestling, and knowing I was world's champion. So I held every sectional title in the entire United States. In fact, for 11 years I was United States champion, but it wasn't the world's title. Now I've got the world's title.
Were you a good guy or a bad guy, or wasn't there such a thing?
In my day, one town would love you and the other town would hate you. So, and if you were in my category where you were always in the top 2, 3, or champion, naturally they hated you. They wanted the underdog to win, so they'd root against you.
And you invented some things in holds.
Yeah. Well, the two holds that you'll see highly and mainly used in wrestling right today is the atomic drop and the figure 4 grapevine. I invented both of them.
Going now, the career is over, and you're going through this period of adjustment. How long did it take before you could kind of snap out of it and get on with,
A couple of years. Yeah, it took that long. Really did.
What were you doing with yourself during that time? Pouting?
No, I'd go to the gym and I'd work out. And well, at the time when my heart was bad, right after the San Martino match, I couldn't work out, and I could just lay around, and it was tough. It was really tough. I just can't explain it. I had nothing to do but just sit around and reminisce.
Well, how did you finally get yourself out of the doldrums? Well,
after a couple of years of sitting around, I guess, feeling sorry for myself, I accumulated the idea I want to get into business. And the first venture I went into, I bought a drive-in liquor store, and I built a nightclub alongside of it. And for a while, during the time I had that, I bought some apartments in Haddon Heights, and I ran apartments. In fact, 62 of them. And a little after that, I bought a mobile home park from a fellow that was very close to me in Mount Ephraim. And between the three entities, I had my hands full.
Mm-hmm. And you've obviously done all right for yourself. You're living in a beautiful home here in Haddonfield.
Thank you very much.
Why Haddonfield?
Well, my roots were back. See, I'm born and raised in Camden, but I always liked Haddonfield. I felt Haddonfield was the one spot that if I ever made it in life or ever got to where I could afford it, I don't like to live beyond my means, but if I couldn't afford this, I wouldn't live here. I'd move to where I could afford it, but I can afford to live here, and I love Haddonfield.
And if anybody looked at you right now, they'd think that maybe you were wrestling last week. You look like you're in terrific shape.
Oh, I stay in shape. I work out at least 3 to 4 times every week.
And what do you do with yourself nowadays to keep occupied?
I'm very happy to say I'm a casino host at the Playboy Club in Atlantic City, and it's a dynamite job. I'm with a lot of super people that I work for. I enjoy being around the crowd again.
It's kind of like a little touch of the old days.
It sure is.
Do you find people come up and say, I saw you wrestle this guy and that guy? Or?
Oh, yes, every day. There isn't an hour goes by that I don't have a few people say, buddy, I'm a walking advertisement for wrestling,
And you obviously get a big kick out of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think anyone would.
Do you watch wrestling on TV today, or do you go see
Occasionally, yes. Back in late '78, early '79, I went down and I did some booking in Florida. I did it more or less for my son. He never seen me wrestle, and he wanted to see me around wrestling. So I did some booking, and to make him happy, I wrestled about a half a dozen matches. And I also worked up around the mid-Atlantic states, which is South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia.
You mentioned before that wrestling, as you know it, is kind of a lost art today.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see on TV today not necessarily pleases you, or maybe it displeases you.
It displeases me, yes. Again, I have to keep bringing this up. I will never knock wrestling, but some of the things I see that they're doing today just insults most people's intelligence. And I, for one, will be the first one to say, well, it's not right. And they don't have to resort to a lot of the things they're doing today. Get back more to wrestling. There should be more rules set aside in wrestling today. In my day, different things would happen. You'd get suspended, you'd get fined. I remember a match I wrestled Primo Carnera in St. Nicholas Arena in New York, and I beat him, and right after they raised my hand, I was going out of ring, and he was up on one knee, and I just went over and shoved him off his knee back down onto the mat, and I got a 2-year suspension. I did not wrestle in the state of New York.
Nowadays they're bringing chairs into the ring.
God, next to a machine gun, I guess, if they could carry it in there. But it's ridiculous. There's some super wrestlers in there. Look at Backlund, a phenomenal wrestler. Magnificent Morocco, dynamite wrestler. A lot of great wrestlers. As far as I'm concerned, they don't have to resort to this kind of stuff.
Maybe it's the promoters. Maybe there aren't enough bright, smart enough promoters around today who can get back to where you'd like it.
Well, actually,
do you agree with that?
Don't. Yes, yeah. I agree that a lot of the things I see done in the ring today, you don't need it. Wrestling always drew before, and it'll always draw again. Wrestling's the second oldest sport in the world.
What's the oldest? Running?
Running.
Yeah.
See, when man was primitive and he had fear, he would run. When you cornered him and you would attack him, he'd wrestle. So,
you know, I almost sense that if somebody prodded you enough, you wouldn't mind getting back into the sport and having some control over what the sport.
I love it well enough that if the right thing came up, yes, I'd get back in there. On a supervisory sort of, thing that where I know I could do a lot for wrestling. Just like I told you back in '79, I managed a young fella, Jimmy Snuka. If they ever brought him up around here, he would set this place on fire. He's the greatest athlete I've seen in wrestling in the last 25 years.
There must be something about the sport, though, that keeps bringing fans back. There must be something innately about wrestling that no matter whether you like it today or not, it
Right.
still draws people.
Right, it sure does. It always will. It always will. Wrestling is how am I going to say it? You can use the term show. I think it's the greatest show on earth. But believe me, it's got action, it's got strength, it's got everything about it. And if they resort more to wrestling, which I'm trying to put across here, it would even be greater.
Mm-hmm.
The public don't want to see this constant kicking, hair pulling. They want to see some holds. In my day, we had holds where a guy would give up, or you'd beat a guy with a hold. You hardly see that today.
And everyone's got a costume today, it seems. Nobody just walks in there with a jacket and trunks on.
Right. Well, again, you don't need that, really. You really don't. You know, there's such a thing as having charisma or being colorful, but you can overdo that too.
Is there any concern that maybe there aren't enough young wrestlers coming along and the thing might dry up, or is there always going to be?
Oh, no. There'll always be great wrestlers. Look at the high schools today. They're producing super wrestlers. Colleges. There'll always be plenty of material for wrestling.
And I guess all it needs then is a little better promotion, a little better legislation, and it can get back to the days that you knew it.
You wouldn't hear one half of the negatives you hear on wrestling if they would do just what we're talking about.
Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. Do you ever listen to that Nat King Cole record?
Yeah, I sure do. I used to have Nat play that a lot for me. I worked on the coast at the time when the number was popular, and I got the name, you know, the Nature Boy name in Hollywood. And I'd walk into the club, and regardless what he was doing, the minute he'd see me, he'd start playing da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I really loved Nat King Cole.
You know, when you were at the top of your game, you attracted other people who were at the tops of their games, be they Nat King Coles or movie stars or whatever.
Sure.
I don't know if Bob Backlund can do that. Most people in other professions, you know, I can't imagine Barbra Streisand palling around with Bob Backlund.
Well,
you were different, is what I'm saying. You had a charisma
true.
that doesn't exist anymore.
I remember seeing Johnny Weissmuller, Nat King Cole, a whole bunch of, you know, all the big stars of that era around the ringside, you know. And I know, say what you want about Gorgeous George. I seen Crosby climb in the ring and get his autograph. Now that's going some.
That sure is.
Stop and think. I seen it happen.
Well, we can go down to the Playboy Club and get your autograph.
Oh, anytime.
Nice seeing you again.
Thank you, Jim. A real pleasure.
There's more to this story that could have been told, but just such elements of mystery are a vital part of the professional wrestling mystique. So we'll end it right here, at the former home of Elizabeth Haddon, who founded this very community, where Buddy Rogers now lives, as the main link to a bygone era.
This he said to me, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return.